People are not going to own cars. So I think if we get to the point where these robotaxi, which is available anywhere, whether it's dirt roads, rural roads, highways, cities, wherever, we're in that process. But I think we're going to get to the point where people are not going to own cars. They're just going to hail them when they need it. And that's going to disrupt how you think about getting around. It's going to disrupt insurance premiums. It's going to disrupt a lot of different things that we haven't even thought about. With me driving around robotaxis, some of the things that I was thinking about is if I flew into Austin and I got on a robotaxi, I don't have to worry about parking. I don't have to even know where I'm going. I just tell it where I'm going. And then if you integrate XAI with Grok and talk to you and interact, and you have that in a robotaxi, you can not have to worry about what languages people speak. I took somebody that was blind. She could do it. We just talk to them. You can imagine businesses where you have a robotaxi that drives you in a new city, gives you a tour, and talks to you about all the things that are there.
You're giving is like endless rides for Robotaxi for all the
Thank God that they opened it up to the public today.
Yeah, right. Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. Season 5 is still going, the age of sustainable abundance. And we have an awesome guest for that. I want to welcome, and I'm really grateful, Joe Tegtmeyer to the show. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
Joe, thank you for making the time and coming on the show. I'm feeling really honored. I also like to say it's always good to speak to another Air Force guy.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good starting point. I know that a lot of people know you for your drone flying, for your presentations about SpaceX, for having, I think you have a Model 3 and a Cybertruck, right?
Yes.
So, and you have a garage, so that's cool too. But maybe first, let's start a little bit about your background. And I'm actually personally also curious what you did in the Air Force and then how you ended up with this Tesla stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been a long period of time to get me to where I'm at right now. But yeah, for those that don't know, my background is when I was a kid, I was just fascinated with space and technology, and becoming an astronaut is something that I wanted to do. And I think I went a little bit beyond just dreaming about it. I actually reached out to people to find out what would be the ways to do that and how could I seriously pursue that dream. And one of my mentors at the time was Frank Borman, and he kind of talked to me a little bit about the things that you would have to do, and that led me through a path where in junior high school, I studied a lot of physics and astronomy and astrophysics. That's what I was thinking I was going to do. Then I went to the Air Force Academy, and it's kind of funny. I thought that astronautical engineering was the same as astrophysics, but it's not. So while I was at the academy, I got my astronautical engineering degree. I also did a lot of flying there. I was a soaring instructor, did my pre-screening for pilot training there, and trying to just basically get the background that I needed to continue on to that dream. And then after that, I was fortunate enough to go to Shepherd Air Force Base for pilot training. That's Euro-NATO Joint Jet pilot training.
I was there too.
Okay, well, there you go. So but your audience may not know, it's kind of a little bit of a different pilot training than everybody else. It brought all the NATO countries together. So we trained with people from all over the countries that were part of NATO, and we did a lot of different kinds of flying than what you would normally see at the regular pilot training bases. So that was part of that goal of trying to get me there. After that, I got a chance to go to the Ohio State University, and the Air Force sent me there through the Air Force Institute of Technology, and I got a double master's in aeronautical and astronautical engineering. And then from that point on, I had a career in the Air Force, and I also tried to apply to become an astronaut. And obviously I didn't get there, but I did do the application process. It was something that I really wanted to do. But my timing may not have been perfect because at that time the space shuttle was going, but it was pretty competitive, and not to maybe a decade or so after when I would have been selected potentially, we retired the space shuttle. So that made it a little bit difficult. So I ended up just doing a lot of my Air Force career, and got a chance to be a commander at a couple of different levels and just finish up my career from there. But as I said, technology has always been kind of a big interest item to me. And one of those is autonomous driving and how would that work? And I used to try to figure out what are the various parts that you would have to do to make it work. And one of the driving forces behind that was my mom. When she got old enough and she stopped being able to drive, she wishes that she had had a something that could drive her around. And I realized at that time there were kind of two big problems with that for her. One, the technology hadn't progressed enough, and so she didn't have the options. And the other was the understanding and use of technology was something that she found very difficult.
Right.
So, so I've been thinking about those two aspects of it, and that's kind of what brought me to really start looking a lot of Tesla. And then I noticed that people were doing flights over Giga Shanghai, Giga Berlin. It kind of inspired me to do that because if you can actually see what's going on the ground, you can see the parts and pieces to this big puzzle and kind of put it together, you get a really good sense of what's actually happening. And I thought that I could do that and provide some input and insight into what was going on so that, way ahead of the time, you can kind of get a sense where the company's going and are there's issues, are they changing course, or are they on track? So that kind of really brought me to where I'm at now. And finally, the whole thing with Giga Texas opened up the opportunity for me to do a lot of SpaceX stuff, which kind of brings me back to my roots.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I want to touch a little bit on the drone flying in a moment. But before that, when you finished your Egypt and they do that kind of selection process, at least I was there from the German Air Force,
Mm-hmm.
even though I later ended up flying for the US Air Force for the F-111s. But when the initial training, there
Mm-hmm.
was this kind of selection board. Was there any particular type of plane or type of flying that you were after on your own, or were you okay with whatever they would select?
Well, obviously, I'd be okay with whatever they selected because I wanted to, finish the program, be a pilot. I graduated in kind of a weird period of time for the U.S. military and the Air Force, and that was we were kind of faced with a problem of having too many pilots and not enough cockpits, and they were trying to figure out what to do. And today we wish we had that problem, but back then we did. So
Yeah.
they came up with a program called Bank Pilots. And through that program, I was able to go through the AFIT degree program and go to the Ohio State University while we're waiting for the cockpits to open up.
Okay.
And also unusual for Egypt is instead of getting fighter aircraft, which is pretty much what Egypt directed us to. At that time, because of the cockpit issue, they were opening it up to other planes. So we were getting a variety, and I ended up getting a KC-135. So that's what I did my career flying for the most part.
Yeah. Okay. Can you just, for people that are not super familiar, explain what KC-135s do?
Okay, well, KC-135 is kind of an older aircraft now,
Yeah.
but the basic idea is to provide in-flight aerial refueling, and it's kind of a force projection capability that the United States has, and some other countries have as well. And by having this capability, you can take uh, cargo planes, fighter planes, you can do a lot of things and take them all over the world and speed up that process without having to land and refuel. So it's really a critical infrastructure to our entire national military strategy and the way that we do our aviation.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for describing that. One thing people listening to this episode might remember this attack that B-2 bombers did in Iran. If I'm not mistaken, I think they had 4 air-to-air refuelings, 2 on the way down there and 2 on the way back from Louisiana. I actually, and maybe you were actually in the front seat. I once had the great pleasure of taking. I was in fighter jet test flying team. So we flew a couple of planes, 4 to be exact, of a new EW variant of the European Tornado from Germany first to Canada, and then from there to basically the EW part of Red Flag
Mm-hmm.
in the Vegas area. And so all the way from basically Iceland, Keflavik area, all the way over to Canada, we basically hung like
Right.
in like a little like a pearl string with 4 planes. at the boom, so to speak.
Yeah.
We kind of rotated through. So that was a very interesting Atlantic crossing, to be to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's when
that,
the tankers are very popular.
very popular, especially some of the alternate landing options were really sketchy.
Right. Right. And that's where you hope that the boom is working and not having a malfunction.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
but for some of your audience, it's something to think about is in-flight refueling and having that tanker capability is kind of like having the supercharger network for Teslas.
Yeah.
Is that, without that, you're pretty much a city kind of car. But by having the superchargers, you can now go cross country. And that's what tankers bring to the Air Force.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that's a brilliant analogy, especially this for me, and I've explained it or mentioned it to a bunch of people exactly that way by saying why, or trying to explain why are they always pointing out you can recharge from 20 to 80% in 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, if you really take that scenario that we were just discussing when I was kind of behind you, so to speak, on the
Yeah.
boom, we didn't wait until we were almost empty. We actually refueled probably when we are down to about 30% or 35% or so. So it was more like a topping off, and we never went all the way to full, right? Besides the fact that it's pretty tricky to refuel for such a long distance over and over and over again. But it's really, like you said, a topping off, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
getting the most oomph in that middle sector between 20% and 80%, and it goes really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a beautiful analogy. Obviously, we have to say this as aviators,
Yeah.
but um, very cool. Now, with that basically in place, how much I've always been curious, and now that I have you, I have to ask you. I know that flying a drone is not the same like flying a plane, but one thing that amazes me is if I'm not mistaken, I see where you have either your Model 3 or your Cybertruck, and you're sometimes on the east southeast side, or you're all the way there where the new data center thing is being built. I mean, I don't know, but just by a guesstimate, you like what, up to 2 miles or so away where you're standing on ground level where the drone is. I mean,
Yeah.
do you have a huge screen to see what the drone sees, or how do you do that?
Well, for a while, I actually used an iPad because it was big, but now I have it's a built-in screen and controller that DJI has, and I do use DJI drones. I use an Air 3, and part of the reason why I use that, it's got a lot of performance, and it also has a 70 millimeter optical zoom, so I get really crystal clear imagery without having the digital zoom with that drone. One thing that you may not know is I actually move around a lot while I'm flying. So
Okay.
when I edit it, it makes it look like it's all contiguous, but I
Yeah.
actually start on the south end and I fly part of it there. So I'm closer and I can actually see it and I get better signal. And then I move up to the north end or vice versa. So I'm not always in one place. And, sometimes depending on the weather and how fast it takes for me to go from one place to the other, you might see in the drone where the imagery looks a little different, like it's a little brighter or darker from one side to the other, and that's because it took me some time to go from one place to the other. Um, so I do that. You say it's not the same as flying, and it's true. You're not in the drone,
Yeah.
but a lot of the principles are the same. In a plane, fuel and your fuel level and where you're at is very important. And
Right.
you're always concerned how much fuel, where can I go, and all that. With the drone, it's the same thing, but it's battery. So I've got a lot of different strategies and rules of thumb that I've come up with. For example, fly the farthest away with the highest amount of battery and work your way back. I have for people that like you are in the military, I have like an airspace plan, if you will, and I have minimum safe altitudes, and I have my escape paths and things where if I had a problem, where would I go, or what would I do in this region of the site, of what altitudes I need to be, or what obstacles might be there. So that's kind of developed over time, and I have a pretty good idea of where that is. Just like flying, situational awareness with the drone is important.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if the KC-135s had that in the later stages. What we ended up starting to have is basically a map overlay, kind of like a moving map display, kind of, if you look at the screen of the Tesla, where if you have FSD engaged, you can kind of see the map where you're going, the street, and then the blue indicator and stuff like that. We used to have that in the jets, and those maps included, and I don't know if you created this for yourself, like the high voltage power line safe zone or minimum safe altitude and stuff. I'm always amazed how you squeeze the drone on the south end there, where the cooling towers and the high power lines, and then that area where they have those three outlets there, the three tunnels. That's not really a big space unless you go down very early, what used to be the parking lot. So those kind of things, I'm assuming, is something when you have the same area all the time, you can really develop the pattern, so to speak, right?
Yeah, there's another secret that I use, and that is I do a lot of photos and video. I can't do them both at the same time.
Right.
And so depending on the conditions, if the conditions are good, like low winds and nice temperatures, I'll go and I'll pre-fly and I'll get a bunch of photos first, and I'll kind of see where rain here, if there's a truck there or something has changed. I will know that in advance. And then I'll go back and do the video. So I've kind of scoped it out. If the conditions are bad, I can't do that so much. So my flight patterns change. I don't get in close as much. And you'll probably notice if you really pay attention to my videos in the winter versus the summers, that I have a lot more transitions between shots in the videos because I have to stop the video, take a picture, and keep going. And I have to do that to be efficient because of battery life.
Yeah, that makes sense with the colder temperatures. I also remember for a while when they were building that kind of test, like what is it called, wind tunnel, and that kind of what looked like a wet lab kind of thing where they seem to spray the cars.
The Rainmaker.
Yeah, Rainmaker, and then they had that helicopter landing pad. I remember that in one or two of the videos you were explaining that people probably don't realize that you basically have to file a flight plan or something similar to that, especially in proximity of the airport. All those little things I personally find are really helpful for people to know because, Joe makes a YouTube video every so few days and it makes it look real easy. But I believe there's way more to it than people probably think.
Yeah, well, that is important to know. One, I do have permission to fly there by Tesla. And two, I do get flight permission from the FAA for every single flight.
Right. Okay, cool. Now, if we take back the topic of the season 5 that we're in with this age of sustainable abundance that we're working towards, when you think about it for a moment, looking at your most recent 2 little tours that you had, and then maybe also some previous ones, could you tell the audience a little bit about what you're seeing that gives you kind of indication that we are on track towards this age of sustainable abundance?
All right. I guess the first thing that I would see is just talking to the people, seeing their energy, seeing their passion for what they're trying to do. And I call it like the can-do attitude of, okay, there's a problem. What do we need to do to fix it? Here's a couple of solutions. Here's the one we want to do. Let's implement it. I think that that's very underappreciated and it's very necessary because when we think about all of the big projects that Tesla wants to take on, whether it's full self-driving, whether it's Cybertruck with a whole bunch of new technology that hasn't been used before, like 48-volt architecture, stuff like that. If we look at the data centers and the AI that they're trying to integrate with the robot, all of these are very huge, big, difficult problems. And each one of them by themselves could be a company. And each one of them could dedicate lots of resources to try to solve. And you need to have that can-do spirit and bring in people who are able to really dedicate their time and work on those. And then the next level beyond that is bringing them all together. For example, if you think about the iPhone, Apple or Steve Jobs did not invent every single technology that's in the iPhone. But what they do is they aggregate all maturing technologies and put it into a new product or a package, and then they're able to then sell that, and we can start imagining a bunch of different options. For example, I do a good amount of my YouTube videos when I'm doing interviews or intros or when I'm at SpaceX, whatever, with my phone. and
Right.
I'm able to use my Starlink dish and upload it, and voila. So I've kind of created a business with a phone that was created by bringing together technologies. And I think that's what is happening here with Tesla. And so that really being there, being able to see the people, talk to them, see what they're working on, and then physically see that they're executing on that really brings a lot of that confidence in me where we're going to go. Now, it's not always going to be super easy. There's going to be challenges along the way. It's whether it's product design or maybe a technology that they thought we were going to bank on didn't work out or was overcome by events. And we can talk a little bit about Dojo in a bit
Yeah.
about how that works out. So those things can get in the way. And then you also have, I don't know if you call it detractors or people who they are threatened by what is going on because it may affect their way of doing business. It may affect their product. It may affect a lot of things that they don't want to change. And now you see the change happening. So you need to have a company that not only has that vision and is able to execute on that vision, but also be able to keep focused on that vision despite all of these challenges and keep pushing us forward. And that's one of the things that really attracts me to what Tesla and SpaceX is doing, specifically SpaceX with the space program, because I wanted to be an astronaut. I spent a lot of my time trying to do that. Through the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And we really didn't progress beyond low Earth orbit. We didn't really progress on a national space program or policy. And you just need somebody to get in there and say, here's a vision, we're going to execute and let's just do it. And that's something that really attracts me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I wanted to go somewhere else, but I'm going along
Okay.
with that one. No, that's fine because I'm obviously a space buff too. I've seen every launch, every test launch. Yeah, and I remember Tim Dodd crying, "Water tanks can fly."
Yeah.
So remember that. One thing that I've been curious about, since you are relatively close to it and you're also physically close to Boca Chica, and I don't know if San Antonio is kind of halfway between Austin and Boca Chica or not, or something
So
like
it's on
that.
the way.
On the way, yeah, at least in the same state, let's put it
Yeah.
that way. Do you see, can you see kind of like cross-pollination, overlap, anything like that between SpaceX and Tesla?
Yeah, that's actually sort of the way that the Elon Musk companies are structured is they kind of have one big HR system and it allows movement between companies and it also allows a lot of sharing between the companies. Example, some of the structural engineers and materials engineers that work at SpaceX have been helping out Tesla and then vice versa. And that's pretty common. I know of a lot of people that started off in one of the companies and then now is working on another one. And it reminds me a little bit about being in the Air Force, where you're stationed somewhere, you do a job, and then after a period of time, you move to a new station and you start a new job.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that there is disruption with that, but I think there's a strength with that too, is it allows people to use their skill sets in a variety of different ways. You don't get kind of bored or just pigeonholed into one specific thing. Um, and another part of that I think is very strong with Tesla, SpaceX, all those companies is a lot of the people that get in there, they're young, they're energetic, they're very smart, they want to do this thing, and they're put into the position to build something, and it's used right away, and they can see
Yeah.
the fruits of their labor. Whereas, in some of my experience with the government, for example, you may be working on something for your entire career, and it may or may not happen. So I think that's another underappreciated value to this. And to kind of get back to your sort of original question, which I've kind of got around this, is all of these various technologies that they're working together, not only within Tesla, whether it's everything from AI to building cars, but also across the companies where they can share resources, all builds to a future that right now is being discussed as this age of sustainable abundance. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure out what does that actually mean?
Mhm.
And what does that mean for you and for me personally and the society? And then how do we get there? Just recently, I think a couple of days ago, Tesla put out uh, their Master Vision 4, and it kind of talks a little bit about that. But it was more of a high level. It wasn't
Right.
it wasn't a roadmap that says we got to do these 5 things, and if we do these things in this order, we're going to get to this end state. And I think that's something that we're looking for, but it also kind of suggests a little that Tesla themselves are trying to figure that out, because there's huge implications of all of this technology coming together in a way like making a giant smartphone, but now affecting our entire society.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, there are some military terms I'm sure you're familiar with that kind of apply. One of them is staging, right? Like I know that you stage tankers, we stage our fighters, the different services, the Navy stage sometimes their forces, whether it's ships or also jets, and the Army, the transport guys, the logistic guys. So that staging part is what I felt like Master Plan 4 had a little bit of a component of that. The other term that I also find interesting in this context is kind of like this terminology of in theater, right? If you were to say the theater of high technology or bleeding edge technology, that seems to be a little bit the theater that Tesla and SpaceX and XAI, Neuralink to some extent are all kind of like in that same theater. And there's kind of obviously issues coming up that the one company, even if it's not their issue, may have the talent to at least voice an opinion or maybe borrow somebody who has a specific skill set or specific experience to help the other company out. Now, this show is originally an investing show, so I have to at least put in one or two questions
Okay.
about that.
Okay.
So there has been statements, I want to say it kind of mildly, even coming from Elon saying, okay, we want to honor the loyalty of the Tesla shareholders. And at the same time, a lot of people are saying, okay, are they going to split off Starlink? I know that's a big thing that you're very much into, not just as a user, whether you go with Ellie and do
Yeah.
the live stream or on your truck. So Starlink is one thing, but SpaceX in and of itself as an organization, um, I've kind of two questions in that, or three. One is, do you think it's going to split off Starlink? Number two, do you think that existing Tesla shareholders would, if there were an IPO for SpaceX or Starlink or both, somehow get something extra rather than just normal IPO and everybody has to wait for the day and then you buy when you get to that
Mm.
point? How do you see that basically happening, or what do you think is going to happen there in the foreseeable future?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a good question. It's been something that's been talked about for a while, and I think a couple of thoughts. First, um, the fundamental question is what would it benefit, in this case, SpaceX, or maybe all of Elon Musk's company, to spin off Starlink as an IPO? What would be the rationale for that, and what are the pros and cons for doing that? The second part of that is that Tesla is a public company, and Elon has that experience. And I don't know if he really enjoys the fact that it's public all the
I
time.
would say no. I don't think so.
Right. So he's made references to that with SpaceX itself and some of the other companies. And then with Starlink, he said that the first they needed to get it to a point where it was cash positive,
Right.
so that investors don't like investing in things that's losing money.
Yeah.
So you need to get to that point to consider it. And then the second part goes back to what would be the benefit for that. So for Starlink specifically, it's a way of giving internet to people around the world that either can't or it's very difficult to get internet. And that is kind of the hook of the sale of what's going on with Starlink. But the underlying reason is that the revenue that you get through Starlink will help fund the Mars mission
Right.
and the development of what's going on with Starship and everything that we see down at Starbase. So there is a economic reason for doing that. So if you were to make it an IPO, the chances of or the potential of bringing in more cash flow and aiding that particular goal is definitely there. But it brings a downside. Is now you are kind of beholden to the shareholders and the investors and people who want to see return on their investments and so forth. And when you do that, you may be in a position where you have to make choices that may not necessarily be the best for your primary mission, which is raising revenue for Mars. It may be for the shareholders' benefits. So that becomes a difficult challenge, and I'm not too sure if Elon or SpaceX is wanting to go to that yet, but it's always a potential.
Yeah,
We do. Go ahead.
yeah, I agree with you. One thing that I've been thinking, and I guess it must be or should be allowed to dream a little bit, um, is I think Tesla, from an investing perspective, is very unique when it comes to the retail community, not just in context of loyalty, but just in general, how big it is percentage-wise compared to other companies of that overall scale and so forth. So I have this dream to say, why do people that can invest in these privately held companies like SpaceX and spin-off or not Starlink or something similar, why can't the threshold be significantly lowered or even go to the point to say, okay, for every dozen shares or whatever a fair number would be 50 shares or some number, 100 shares that somebody has, you can get eligibility for a certain number of shares, for example, in SpaceX, without necessarily having to take it public. I don't know if there's a status like that, but obviously we know, like Ron Barron is one of these guys who always, whenever he is interviewed, he always says, okay, I have a personal stake of my own money in SpaceX, and then my fund has invested in SpaceX. Now I know he has billions and stuff like that, and probably even personally has that. But that always indicated to me there must be a certain threshold where they say, okay, you are allowed, and one might be that you have to be potentially an accredited investor to be even considered. But I wonder if a company could make an exception if the owners, like especially the majority owner like Elon, were to say, okay, I want to, like he said sometimes, I want to do something for the Tesla shareholders, especially the retail shareholders. So I didn't necessarily mean it has to be the straight out traditional IPO. There may also be some other options. I don't think I agree with you, by the way, Joe. I don't think that he enjoys having to report to the public every 90 days or something like that. So yeah, I don't see the financial incentive nor really the regulatory incentive. The only thing would be to say, okay, if we suddenly need to do 3 more launch sites, right? Like, I mean, I know they're building this Slick 37 area with 2 more towers, but let's just say he wanted to really get to 24 launches a day, you probably have to have 4 or 5 launch sites. And to do that, that would cost quite a bit of money, I'm sure. Right. And so that might be something to say, do we really want to do this out of revenue, or would we want to have something that can generate a big influx very quickly? So those are
that may be where Starship is going to play a role. I mean, part of Starship's role is to get the larger, more powerful Starlinks up so that we can get more internet speeds and that kind of stuff. But when you have a capability like a Starship, it opens up a lot of other capabilities that maybe we've never explored before. So there may be opportunities to raise revenue through that way, besides just doing NASA's mission to the moon or going to Mars just for SpaceX. So I think there are those opportunities. As far as whether or not your question was whether or not Tesla shareholders will get a chance if they IPO Starlink to get it. He has said it, and I take him at his word. As you pointed out, there may be different ways of that materializing, but I could see that happening. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is that Amazon has got their Kuiper satellite system. They're very immature at this point as far as getting the number of satellites up, but they are starting to launch them. So there's going to be a competition going on that's more direct to Starlink than we've seen in the past. So that's going to be interesting to see how that develops, and will that change the calculation of the IPO or not? So those things are kind of happening right now.
Yeah, I know. So I have to follow up, since you tossed me that ball. I have to ask you. I think the number is 1683 or 1686. What's your guess? Are they going to make it, or are they going to get an extension?
I think what you're asking is through the FCC, they have a kind of a target that they need to launch 50% of their entire constellation, which is sometime next year.
Yeah.
I think that the numbers are not going to happen. It's just with the launch cadence that they have and the launch vehicles that are ready to do it. I just don't think they're going to make it. But what's most likely going to happen is they'll get a waiver. They'll be able to show, hey, we've been launching certain percentage of them. We have good faith to getting there, and I'm sure that they will extend that requirement. So I don't think that's going to be the big issue. The real issue is, can Blue Origin with their New Glenn get that rocket operating with the pace that they need to be able to sustain getting those satellites up for Amazon? Will ULA, I mean, not ULA, and also Ariane with their Ariane 6 be able to do that as well? None of them, I mean, they've flown their rockets now, which is a good step forward, but none of them have demonstrated the pace necessary to be able to do that. So they're going to have to show that before we can find out what's going on with all the satellites.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. The other thing is, for the non-space nerds, one of the huge differences is that, if I'm not mistaken, SpaceX just landed the 500th booster for Falcon 9.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I really wish, and I know that they're always a little protective of their numbers, but even if you take like normal numbers, right? If you say a launch is 50 million or stuff, I would so much wish somebody would just sit down and say, what's the difference in cost if you can reuse a booster 30 times like the one that they just have, versus throwing it away every time. I don't see New Glenn becoming anywhere close to the cadence. I'm also like, sometimes I like to be a little cheeky, right? Like imagining the guy at the FCC to say, well, guys, you only gave 3 launches to SpaceX. These guys launch like every 3 hours. You could have gotten yourself up if you had launched them on Falcon 9. I don't know that person exists, but
I have a feeling on our national policy standpoint, there's an incentive to try to keep things like Blue Origin and ULA around, so they will work away.
Yeah. So are you actually telling me, Joe, that we need another Starliner?
No, I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there is a lot of interest in keeping different options available. How's that? And right now, yesterday we had a congressional testimony on that, and we can see where those conversations are going.
Yeah, you did that very elegantly. Yeah. No, I just remember that the argument was, why does Boeing get more than twice as much money and can't get it into Gear? Was, yeah, we need to have an alternative. I'm constantly saying, how did that work out for you?
Yeah. No. Right now, I think the whole question about capsules to the ISS and whether or not we're going to have Starliner or whatever, or even Sierra Space's Dreamliner, I think we're getting close to the point where that's no longer really an issue. Now the high ground is looking at what's going on at the moon.
Right.
Because the main reason why is the ISS is slated to be deorbited in about 4 years.
Right.
So if it's every 6-month cadence, the number of opportunities for a Starliner to get flying in any meaningful way is almost pretty much guaranteed not. And I think Boeing is trying to get themselves out of the space business, certainly with the Starliner. And we'll see what happens with the SLS with what Congress says.
Yeah, let's wait and see on that one. Still, since you mentioned the moon, and then we're going to go back towards abundance a little bit, but I want to ask you, since I know as a nerd, I'm making the assumption you're similarly or maybe more nerdy than I when it comes to space. What's your opinion? I mean, there has been a real strong push by the Chinese, and I know there's always this kind of critical perspective, but when I'm purely looking through the technology lens, they have actually done some pretty impressive stuff in the last like 10 years. What's your take? What do you think their goal to get to the moon by 2030 is realistic?
I think it probably is. I mean, they have dedicated the resources. They are doing the necessary steps that you would need to do to prove out technology and then develop it a little bit more and make those plans happen. They're building the hardware that would be necessary, and they've got a lot of experience, more so perhaps than any recent country, of landing and operating on the moon, and it's particularly on the far side and on the south side of the moon, which is where everybody wants to go. To kind of relate it a little bit to Tesla, here's my thinking about what's going on with the space program with China. Tesla started about 10 years ago with thinking about doing autonomous driving, and everybody kind of said, nah, it's not going to happen. It's kind of a pipe dream, whatever. Or SpaceX with landing rockets. Yeah, it's not going to happen. There's the ESA guy back in 2016 that's pretty famous for saying it's a pipe dream. It's just not going to happen. So over about a decade, in all of those cases, including this Chinese program, give or take, the technologies were developed, the lessons were learned, the experience was gained, the products were built, the hardware was put into manufacturing, and now people are saying it's not fair. Why do you have this capability that we don't have? And you should not have that. Maybe we should share it with people, or we should do something else, or maybe we should slow you down or whatever. I think the same thing is going on with China. Is China has been doing this for a long time. It's not a secret. We've known this is happening. We just got very complacent, and we were willing to fund things at cost plus, which is a type of contract which basically is never ending. The budgets blew up. The timelines got so long that we've basically ceded that to China. And then now to come back and say, well, it's not fair, or we need to beat them now, or what's going on with our program, we have let that happen. And I think we need to acknowledge that. As far as if they beat us to the moon this time, is that the end of the world, or what does that mean? Or I think we need to consider that they're going back to the moon for the very first time, and they're going to have to figure out their operations, their logistics, what are they going to do when they get there, and so forth. We've been there before, but we were kind of there as a flag waving photo op thing. What we're trying to do now is go back and stay, which is a completely different thing. And to do that, we need a lot of different capabilities than the Apollo program had. And I think that's what we're seeing with commercial space. And I believe, and I have believed for a long time, because of what I've seen with our government, with NASA, the budgets, and how this has worked to this point, I believe that commercial space is the way for us to go to get to the moon and Mars. And that's really what's going to happen. And I think SpaceX is going to play a big role. Blue Origin is probably going to play a big role. I think Rocket Lab is going to play a role. A bunch of other different smaller companies that are coming online are going to play certain roles. And what I would like to see, and this is my dreaming, but I would like to see somebody like a Jared Isaacman, who was on the Polaris Dawn and Inspiration 4. He was trying to become the NASA administrator, was pulled at the last minute for political reasons. But I would like to see him kind of shepherd this commercial space by bringing together a bunch of different capabilities, kind of like, again, making the iPhone and then making that possible. And if we do that, then we would get back to the moon either before China or a little bit after, either way, but we would be in a much better position to be highly successful and then build on that. And that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I think that's a great perspective to have. I would personally, if anybody were to ask me or put me in charge for some reason for a little while, I would actually use the analogy that you said with the iPhone and take it a little further to say, okay, we don't need the capability of 4 different companies developing and spending money to get to the moon with a rocket. We don't need 4 different landers. We don't need, like if I take the iPhone, right, we don't have to switch out the camera system. Somebody developed the camera system. Yes, they make it better with every iteration, but some group is specializing on cameras. Some people, whole companies specializing on specific applications that you can download from the App Store. Some others focus on the speaker system of the phone. Some others focus on other features that are available. And I don't know if it's true to call it a concerted effort, but I think if we really wanted to push, rather than putting everybody in competition, I think if the goal were clear, and I think that was the beauty of the original Moon program, was to say, we have all these companies, we have all this smart, we have this one government agency, and everybody is contributing to this goal in the area that they're best at, rather than making it a competitive thing where the same, in my opinion, my view, money on the same feature is spent over and over and over, right? Like everybody tries to build a rocket, we need to make different landers, 3 or 4. Yes, there is the redundancy argument, but when we wanted to get there first, we didn't need to have 5 different landers. We needed one lander that actually worked, right? Or one rocket like the Saturn V and stuff. So my dream would go a little bit further to say, if we want to see competition between nations, fine, but why do we have to be competitive within our own environment with each other? I'm not so sure that that is really helping us to get there better or faster.
Possibly. Well, here's a different perspective on that. Back in the 50s, aviation had kind of its golden age where we had a bunch of different companies that were experimenting with a variety of different kinds of airframes, crazy designs, but they were free to do that. And we were in this period of time where we didn't know what the one or a few, the age of consolidation was going to be. So they were free to experiment with a bunch of different things. And the forcing function to give us that common vision for what we saw with the Apollo program was our government. And they kind of said, okay, here's the vision, here's what we're going to do, and did what you said. And they said, okay, we need one lander, we needed to do these types of things. That worked well for Apollo, but it only got us so far. We realized that that wasn't really sustainable. What I see right now is we're in the second golden age of space. And what I mean by that is kind of like the 50s with aviation, we have a bunch of different companies that are experimenting with a variety of different capabilities, different kinds of launchers, different kinds of landers, different kinds of technologies that would make living on the moon or Mars better. We're even seeing with spacecraft or space stations, a variety of different companies like Axiom, Vast, perhaps Blue Origin, a couple other ones that are trying to come up with their way to go. But the forcing function now, I don't think this is belying my opinion. I don't think our government is in a position to provide that common direction anymore. I think we've lost that capability, and that's just my opinion. So what is the forcing function? The forcing function in this case is going to be basically the economy of space, if you will, the open market. What is going to succeed? And I think right now, because we don't know if Starship's going to work. We hope it will, but they're still in development. We don't know if New Glenn is going to work and it's going to be able to do what they want to do. It's still in development. So all of these programs are all in development all at the same time. So it's like in the 50s, but thinking about the 60s. So what I would like to see is all of them try. We let them all compete. Let's see what works in the market. And then if we can get somebody on the commercial side, like a Jared Isaacman, to maybe help shape that and kind of direct that inevitable consolidation that's going to happen and do it now in a focused way, I think commercial space is the way that we're going to be successful. So that's the way I kind of think about it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I was just more putting it in the context of the Chinese having that forcing function, right? Like, and so when it comes to who gets there sooner, I don't know which approach is ultimately better, but I think it's important that the progress is being made no matter what. And it's like you said, it's not really that important who is first or who is there again, I guess is a better way to put it.
I would also say that China is like us in the 60s in the sense that you have a government focused effort to get there, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be sustainable.
Right.
They are also subject to economics. They're subject to what's going on with the market and the realities of hardware and space, because no matter what, space comes down to being very difficult. So we do not know if they're going to be successful or if they're going to be able to sustain it either. So to kind of take a page out of the Chinese book is I think that we should have a multi-year plan where we develop this and continue to experiment, figure out what the consolidation is and build on that rather than trying to do one giant leap and we're there and we're done. And that's what got us into trouble with the Apollo program, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when we jump back to the abundance point, you're taking drone images and video for the new Cortex building. You're giving feels like endless rides for Robotaxi for all the
Thank God that they opened it up to the public today.
Yeah, right. But how I basically bridge that to abundance is, would you venture a little bit in the future to say, okay, like, CyberCap is running, Optimus is coming out, not just within Tesla factory, but maybe on a license to other factories. Maybe even you and I can get one. Cortex and Colossus and all these kind of major data centers are coming online. If you were to venture a little bit into this time of abundance, let's say 3 to 5 years into the future, how do you think life will look like then?
Okay. That's a big question with a lot of different elements. So I'll start with let's just start on the clear path forward if everything kind of works out pretty well.
Right.
So the basis is the AI and AGI, artificial general intelligence, and being able to have the software and the compute necessary to make all the various products work. So the effort to go on to that is we're kind of in that competition phase that I was talking about space, and we haven't got the great consolidation yet. But let's just assume that what Tesla is doing with their programs and with XAI is able to culminate in a future where the capabilities are sufficiently mature that it starts opening things up. So if that's the case, then self-driving vehicles becomes a definite possibility that a lot of people will be using. And I think that that will change a lot of things that we may not have thought about. For example, when I was working, after my time at the Air Force and before I started doing my YouTube stuff, I actually worked at USAA, which is United Services Automobile Association, and offered banking and insurance and that kind of thing. Anyway, when we were there, we were trying to look at the future of what happens if insurance premiums, people stop getting insurance on their vehicles. Well, that will affect the insurance whole program. And also the ownership thing is, if you don't own your vehicles, who is responsible for insuring those vehicles? And how do companies like USAA survive when a bulk of their revenue is through P&C, property and casualty insurance? So I think if we get to the point where all these self-driving cars are available, and if it also allows the Robotaxi, which is available because of the technology that Tesla wants to use anywhere, whether it's dirt roads, rural roads, highways, cities, wherever, I think we will start. I think we're in that process, but I think we're going to get to the point where people are not going to own cars. They're just going to hail them when they need it. And that's going to disrupt how you think about getting around. It's going to disrupt insurance premiums. It's going to disrupt a lot of different things that we haven't even thought about. And with me driving around Robotaxis, some of the things that I was thinking about is, if I flew into Austin and I got a Robotaxi, I don't have to worry about parking. I don't have to even know where I'm going. I just tell it where I'm going. And then if you integrate XAI with Grok, which is kind of their facing interface that can talk to you and interact, and you have that in a Robotaxi, you can not have to worry about what languages people speak. I took somebody that was blind; she could do it without no problem and just talk to them. You could imagine businesses where you have a Robotaxi that drives you in a new city and gives you a tour and talks to you about all the things that are there. So that's going to fundamentally change what we think about personal transportation. If we think about the Tesla, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say the good thing for insurance is, if we really get to 10 times to 100 times safer, then they don't have to pay for anything anymore.
Well, yeah, and that's a valid point. Is what does insurance mean at that point in time? And you would imagine that not owning the car and not having the insurance is going to put a lot of money back into people's pockets.
Yeah.
I was just about to talk about with the semi, if it has the autonomous thing, can you imagine companies and the margins that they could get and the cost savings that they could have, at least from their business, if they don't have to have any drivers at all? So they don't have the rules for drivers of how many hours they can drive at any given time. You can imagine in a short term where you have one driver and 4 or 5 trucks just convoying each other behind.
Yeah, this Australian, truck trains that, where they
Exactly. So the cost savings are going to be enormous, and that will help businesses, completely. One other thing about the autonomous driving is, if you were to buy a car, let's say that's still a thing, it just comes to you. You don't have to, go anywhere to get it.
No, they're starting that already anyways. One thing in that same vein, if you take it a little further, do you think that at those numbers that Elon mentioned, that when Optimus gets into real numbers and the Chinese make a lot and Figure makes a lot, that work will really be mostly replaced by them?
Well, first, I would also say when it comes to robots, we're still in that experimental stage. We don't know what's going to win, and the consolidation hasn't happened. But I think that we're going to have a variety of different selections, and people, if they can see that they provide actual useful functions and they can be tailored to do what you want, I think a lot of people are going to want them, especially if their price is able to be down low enough. But I also think that they're a tool, just like every other tool. It may perform some functions that you normally performed, but it may open up other opportunities that we haven't even thought about right now. And, I think fundamentally humans, we want to have a purpose. We want to be able to, do things that make our lives meaningful. And if we don't have to do the laundry all the time, I'm sure we're going to figure out something else that we can do. So I don't think, if you use the semi with the truckers, they would be out of jobs because of the autonomy. If you think about doing your personal stuff, you wouldn't have to do certain things. But I still think people are going to find a way to have a purpose. And I think it's just going to shift to different kinds of jobs and different kinds of specialties. Um, another thought that I had a long time ago was if we had fully autonomous airplanes, commercial airplanes, and there was no pilots on board, would people get on the plane? And for the longest time, I thought no. But I'm thinking now, if we have self-driving cars, we have robots around, people get familiar with how that all works, there may be a time where we don't even have to have pilots in planes, and people would be more willing to do that. So I think the way we do our business and the way we think about our lives will be changed more than we can even imagine right now. And I think even more than Elon imagines, because he's just thinking about total addressable markets, how many can we sell, what is the money that we're going to get in. But I don't think anybody fully knows what is this going to mean when they are all out there. And you know, uh, sort of the negative part of that is will people accept it? Because sometimes if you look on there's these curves all the time. You have people on the right, I'll do it whatever, the newest technology, I take it, write it down. Then you have the other part is hell no, I ain't going to do it no matter what. And you have this big bell curve in the middle, and how that shifts and what are the people's responses to that going to be. I think despite having the technology being maybe available in 5 years or so, I think it's going to take a decade or two for people to get to that bell curve to really accept it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Even though if you look at some of the more recent technologies, like you mentioned as one of the comparatives to use like an iPhone, I don't know. I mean, maybe not an iPhone per se, but having some sort of smartphone has basically become almost the norm, right? Like that I don't think there are very many people who still are on that left side and saying, no, I don't want to, no phone and stuff like that. But generally, I agree with you. The other aspect that I've been thinking about lately, and I want to ask you maybe to kind of wrap up this really nice conversation. I would say, I don't know if you're willing to accept that title, but I would say you are a master drone flyer with it. And mastery, if I go by my definition, has a lot to do with experience. Right? There's I oftentimes say there's a mechanical component to almost everything, even if it's abstract. Certain steps, certain technologies, certain things you need to be aware of, certain rules, checklists, battery life, a ton of things. But to me, that's kind of the mechanical side. But then there's also, to really get to some form of mastery, what I call the artistic side, where you take all these things and you become more and more aware and familiar with them. But then how do you actually use them? How do you actually, and I have to put this in as a little joke. I'm sometimes wondering if the guys at Tesla know when Joe is doing his night flight, so they pull down the curtains for the windows that they don't want you to look in, right? But that's such a brilliant thing to say, okay, I can even fly this thing at kind of dawn, let's call it, and look inside because of the circumstances of the windows, and even do it on the side of the building where I'm running a threat of having the power lines really there and they're not really visible at night or when it's dark. So to me, this is a form of mastery that you, for this particular application of drone flying, have achieved. And to me, when people ask me, how will life in the age of abundance look like? One of the answers, and I want to ask you what you think about it, that I give is, I think there are so many things that people are passionate about that if money were no issue and time were no issue, that they would be really interested to master or advance themselves towards mastery. So Joe might do like little classes, how to learn to fly over Giga, Texas or something like that, a master class in drone flying or something. So what do you think? Am I like completely nuts, or is there something in that direction?
I think to some degree it will free up if people don't have to do certain tasks or whatever, and they have more time to kind of figure out
I thought of
what
the
is,
truck
is their
driver.
place in, what's that? Yeah, what is their place in the world and everything. I think there will be a group of people that will take advantage of that and kind of remold yourself, try something new, maybe whatever that is that you are interested in, be able to really put a lot of your time to that interest thing. And maybe even to some degree freeing you from having to work for somebody else. So you're not on somebody else's schedule, priority, or timelines. It's whatever you want to do. That being said, as being a realist that I am, is there will be a group of people that won't be able to make that transition.
Right.
And it's either that they can't or they don't want to. And change is a very difficult subject. I think with corporations, you have change managers, you have a bunch of different ways of trying to deal with that change. And it's just because it's a fundamental human nature kind of thing. So what it may do is it may kind of democratize across the society of who can adapt and make the most of this new abundant society, and then there will be the other parts that won't. And then so it's not going to be a utopia where we're all just living perfectly. I think it's going to shift across the demographics, and we're still going to have to deal with that, but using the new tools that we have.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. That will be definitely an exciting future. Now, if people, and I hope they do, enjoyed our conversation today, and I know you mentioned the Starlink, I mentioned the Patreon channel and stuff, what would be the best thing that you would leave the audience with? How can they actually support you in what you do?
Oh, okay. Well, I do appreciate just people watching my YouTube videos. My channel is Joe Tegtmeyer. My X account is Joe Tegtmeyer. On Patreon, you can find me as well. Those are great ways of supporting me. But the reason why I'm doing all of this and what really kind of drives me is we have a potential for a very bright future. And companies like Tesla or SpaceX are doing the work to take the vision, do the execution of it, and then lay the foundations to make it sustainable. And I think if you look at what is going on and you just imagine where this is going for us, that we have a much brighter future, something to be excited about. And just to see, when I say young people, I mean young at mind, that work for these companies, that are enthusiastic, they're very intelligent, they're very driven, and they're making a difference. And I think we should encourage that. I think that's what's going to drive our country forward. And that's really what I'm trying to do with what I'm doing with the Giga Texas and SpaceX and everything else.
Yeah, thank you. And I really want to thank you myself, but also for anybody in our audience who, just as I do, enjoys what you're doing. I mean, I don't know how far it is from Austin to San Diego, but it's probably like at least 1,000 miles or more. And I always feel, since I'm following your channel and the videos, that it feels like I've been there through the evolution of that whole place and all the things that you have basically analyzed and brought to us. So really, thank you, Joe, for doing that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a remarkable 5 years.
Yep. All right.